think it's the 2nd of June, and I've spent the whole day in my pyjamas, and I have to say, I'm not exactly sure if I'm hungover, but I'm like just at a bit of a low ebb, and drinking is obviously a very stupid thing to do when you've got the fatigue and exhaustion sort of syndromes that I have. But by the same token, it's like asking someone who's got healing burns to not, scratch, a healing scab, the short-term, the short-term torture often sort of overrides the longer-term solution, especially when you're pretty much lost hope of a long-term solution. And I guess my memory's been probably fading a little bit over the years. Certainly, it's not just that I'm a Gen X, it's also that the very cognitive disabilities that I've acquired, as distinct from those that I was born with, do impair memory and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm probably saying things I've said before, and but I guess I'll say because I went through a spate of sort of desperate, sort of almost bloody-minded, like someone has got to pay attention to what is happening to me. I come from very nearly a sort of clan of leftists who regard themselves as sort of, if not activists exactly, then ready to act for the underdog at a moment's notice, none of which will do anything but block me. So, I can completely understand why people would block me and not respond to me, because, when I was going through like an extraordinarily hellish experience, being very extraordinarily badly victimised, and during a phase that I had attempted suicide twice, and all that they would do, this lovely family of mine, all that they would do would it would not be to come and help me escape the abuse that I was receiving, but to tell on me to the local, I still don't understand the network of it, but the mental health system here, and get me hospitalised under the Mental Health Act, which was like getting stuck in pit stop in an arcade game of Daytona, when you've really got quite a lot to do and already kind of inconvenienced, and then they, get you fucking sectioned. And my neighbour Mitchell, not too long ago, I'd wanted to see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest vaguely, for quite a long time, and he decided to show that to me because I think he found it a bit of a gas that his neighbour had done the whole Cuckoo's Nest thing. And it's like, oh my God, I heard so many bad things about Nurse Ratched. I thought that she would be bad. Like, I wish I had a nurse like her. Jesus Christ. She had the touch of a fucking angel. Mind you, I wouldn't mind having like a really big silent friend to put a pillow over my breathing holes at the moment, because I'm not really quite sure how to do it myself. And nobody cares. I know nobody cares. Well, I don't know nobody cares, because those are two absolutes that I've stated. One of them is I know, which leaves no room for believing anything different. and the other absolute is nobody, which excludes anybody, everybody else. It excludes from the pool of candidates everybody. So I suppose that I'm sort of trying the second time. I guess the first bout was about October, the second bout was about January, and now it's early June, and I guess I'm sort of trying again in a kind of way. And I've sort of dug out a few more email addresses, and like, I don't really know, again, and I feel like I've said this before, I don't really know what I'm really hoping for. In some sort of sick sort of sense, maybe I just want to prove to myself that this place that I'm going to leave my body behind in isn't worth, my sentient self. It's a little bit difficult though, because, as I've said so many times, I don't know if anyone, I've never been suicidal before this. I mean, I was a bit suicidal when I arrived in Christchurch, but I don't see that sort of 18 months distinguished in the middle by my move from Wellington to Christchurch as being really particularly distinct, because it's just been abuse, and Christchurch for the first month that I was here, before I moved into the second apartment, because I was just in temporary accommodation for a bit. Where I had time to sort of try to, do a bit of a systems check on myself and do a bit of Googling, like what's going on with me. And I diagnosed myself with the conditions that were later psychiatrically diagnosed after the incorrect diagnosis of some sort of form of bipolar disorder, which is sort of a new, very silly diagnosis called mixed mood disorder, which is like a very rapidly changing mood disorder. Which is very distinct from bipolar disorder, which is characterised by very long periods of one mood and another, and that's usually months of depression and then weeks of mania. And the DSM in all its glory has it cannot stop expanding until it accounts for every individual person who's ever been alive. And I don't know if anyone's actually seen me in what would look very much like a mixed mood disorder, but it is alternating between crying and laughing. I don't know. They didn't ever see that. It was just like based on bullshit that my fucking, I don't know. Like I think I think my grandmother's bloodline's quite personality disordered. I can't account for the people in my grandmother's bloodline who married into other bloodlines, but the personality disorders appear to be pretty rampant throughout the family. And I think there's less desire to help than there is to... I don't know. I don't know what goes on the minds of people who would rather let someone drown slowly and painfully over months than admit they're wrong and fish them out of the sea. I don't know what kind of people those are, but there's a lot more of them than you think, and a lot of people go, well, what's happened with modern society? Why do we have more narcissism? People come up with these hypotheses about social media, selfie culture and all that kind of stuff, and it's like, come on, you morons. There's the same people have existed all the time. The only reason now is that we don't have any all that kind of bullshit doesn't matter particularly. I mean, it degrades culture as a whole, but as a libertarian, I don't believe that I have any right to choose how society as a whole occurs. But I can, curl my lip at it. But these people who focus on themselves in that kind of sense, they don't just leave it at that. They also enact their personal wishes in any way that they're not prevented from doing, and that turns out in quite antisocial ways. And so a lot of these narcissists, as we mean in a kind of cultural or personal or interpersonal sense, they're also, I mean, narcissists themselves are not particularly dangerous, but the fact is that narcissism is the further up the antisocial, the further up the personality disorder chain you go, like, you don't just move into a different category, you drag with you the previous category into new territory. So, a sociopath, like when people say a narcissistic sociopath, and it's like, that's a contradiction in terms. It's like saying a cold ice cream. To be a sociopath, you have to be narcissistic, and then you also have to have the desire to actively harm somebody. Whereas narcissists are perfectly happy to harm somebody else, but the intent of harming someone else, I mean, it's cognizant, but it's not, the goal isn't to harm the person. The goal is to, achieve what one wants for oneself, never mind the collateral damage. So they'll do it quite knowingly that they're harming other people, but the goal is not to harm the other person. Whereas for sociopaths, they have that, plus they have an actual enjoyment in harming others. And psychopathy is a different matter, and there's a bit of debate about it, and the most compelling part of the debate that I have is that it is not a continuum of the on the narcissism, sociopathy kind of gradient. It's actually, I think it's categorically different, and I do believe the research that suggests that female psychopaths do not necessarily have narcissism. Like, it's quite a categorically different disorder, although it shares a lot of similar traits with sociopathy. It's really, really quite different. And I believe that I know a female psychopath very well. There's a hell of a lot of self-entitlement, but I don't think there's much of what one would call self-esteem there. Just a lot of spite for people she thinks are better than her, which, and a great desire to harm others, and would go to some lengths to harm others. So the impact on victims can be very similar, but the perpetrator of the stuff that victimises victims is can be quite different. And I am pretty bloody sure that our culture has not created more of those. I don't I don't even really care either way whether or not our culture has encouraged more of them to come out of the woodwork, making it more, making it culturally desirable to exhibit narcissistic traits. And narcissism these days is sort of a similar, similarly, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. It's narcissism these days. If people say a lot of true things about narcissism, online and whatnot. But if you just think of, instead of narcissist, you just think of abuser. Quite often they mean abuser, and the abuser may be a narcissist, or they may be more than a narcissist, or they may be much worse than a narcissist without actual self-regard. But whatever they are, there's a lot of knowledge about these people. What there is not is a rule of law that will hold them to account, or even provide any deterrent to their actions. And it's this very strange thing, and I haven't lived obviously in any other generation. I mean, obviously the generation that I'm in my 40s in is whatever the fuck this generation people were born into is called. I've sort of given up on following with the generations, because they're not actually generations anymore, they're just sort of decades. Because the difference between a boomer and a Gen X or a millennial, because it depends what if you're young or old boomer, and when you produce offspring, that would there's quite room for it to move from one literal genuine generation to another within that. So boomers have kids who are both Gen X and millennial, and there can be a boomer of 70 who has a young Gen X like me, or a old Gen X, or even a millennial, but we are talking, because generations don't come in neatly separated envelopes where every 30 years somebody gives birth, and then every 30, that's not how generations work, but we're just talking about roughly characterising sort of decades, and it's not about the people, we just talk about the people who are captured within those generational decades, and it's not a star sign, but it can be predictive. But what's happening these days is that there's something much bigger than generational differences going on now, and that is the fault of the boomers, and it's not the cognizant fault of the boomers, but the reason that we started naming generations when the boomers began was because something happened. And the background to the thing that happened was the end of the Second World War. And then the foreground to what happened, which is why they're called boomers, is because there was a lost generation. And I think my dad was born in that generation. There are fuck all people who were born in the West, or probably even like a lot of Asia, who were born in that period. So he was born in 1950. Not many, Westerners were born then, because there just wasn't the opportunity to breed, right? Because people were away at war, or, for the most part. So the boom came and the male soldiers came home, and there was lots of sex, lots of babies, and boom, there we go. And everyone, all the fucking young millennials, and a lot of the millennials are freaking 40, 35, like they're not, they're blamed for what the Zoomers are doing, whatever. And I've been called boomer like so many times, okay boomer, when that was going on. It's like, boomer? Do you know what that means? Like, it doesn't mean someone who's a fuddy-duddy, it means someone who was born in the fuck fest after everyone came home after like Hitler killed himself. Like, it's got a meaning. And everyone gets more conservative as they get older, and it's not because they acquire more wealth, which was one mean-spirited hypothesis. It's because when you get older, you learn more about how life works, and you realise that you learn a lot about how money works, the economy works, and you learn a lot about psychology. And the economy and psychology are not very distinct areas of social science, and economics is definitely a social science. Sorry, it's not It's not really mathematical inherently. A lot to do with behaviour and positive behavioural economics as well. And so, I identified myself as a social democrat in my early 30s, and that was like way too old to believe such stupidity. But at least I wasn't a fucking socialist. And no, social democracy is not socialism, because it still relies on capitalism. But with that idea that everybody should have what everyone else has, or at least never struggle to have anything, that was what made we haven't had that many laws sort of passed in that period. I mean, we've had loads in the especially 90s and 2000s, but a lot of them were amendments or kind of intensifications of other laws. So and then what we have is we have a whole bunch of new laws or amendments or regulations or whatever, and they're all designed to sort of cure some social ill, and I agree that many of them are social ills in the sense that they are very badly affecting humans and the society that humans live in. And all these politicians are scratching their heads wondering what's not working, what other bills can we push through Parliament to make things better. It's like none. You just need agencies that really enforce those. So that's what the regulators are supposed to do, but the regulators don't, because and then there aren't enough regulators anyway. So this whole idea that, well, I'm not going to honour your Privacy Act request, and I'm going to make a really fucking bonkers, lunatic fucking excuse for it. Like, I could even just make up something that would probably get someone in the 60s locked up for life in a mental institution and give that as a reason. It's not even a reason under the Privacy Act. It doesn't matter what you fucking say. The chances that you're going to be punished for withholding what you should give are close to zero. And that's only a little bit more than the likelihood that the Privacy Commissioner's staff is even going to look at it. And that's what's wrong. It's just like parenting, where you have an ultimatum but you don't follow through, which is just teaching people that, okay, well, I'm going to kick in the fucking window with my soccer ball or my cricket ball, and I'm not even going to say sorry. I'm just going to go, fuck you, Dad. And at most, Dad's going to have a growl at you, but he's not going to make you do anything. He's not really going to ground you. He's not going to take away PlayStation. You're not going to have to work it off. You're not going to have to stay in your room. Like, nothing's going to happen. And then after a while, Dad doesn't even bother saying anything. They're just like, yeah, well, I guess we'll just, whatever. And that's all very well and good if the impact's only on Mum and Dad, but the fact is when the impact is on other human beings, then we've got a really big problem. And it's a really big problem that I think the United Nations is aware of about New Zealand, that, I have a really fucking spectacular GP, and she's she's from Europe. She moved from Europe, and I just think she's sort of got a, I just think she's a bit of a cut above in that sort of sense. Just being sort of, I don't know, whatever. I don't want to go too deep into it, but You know, New Zealand's just too callow. It's a callow youth. But anyway, you know, I was saying that I feel that what I'm going through, which is a mega fucking nightmare on steroids for a very long time now. You know, I was just saying, look, I've got to the point where I really do think that there's some sort of judicial corruption and she said, oh, well, New Zealand has a very low corruption rating, you know, and I've seen that myself. You know, you can go to very reliable, you know, Pew, and I don't know if Pew does corruption, but, you know, there's like plenty of places where you can sort of see the rising up and down of corruption levels in countries. But firstly, as I pointed out, well, that's just relative to other countries. And as I said, you know, there will be, I said of all the Nazis, there will be one that's killed the fewest Jews. You know, we wouldn't say that he's a Jew lover, you know. It's just like compared to other countries. And the second thing is that there's so much more going on that New Zealand is not, the data that New Zealand's not capable of collecting, like Stats New Zealand's a bit of a joke. And it doesn't help that Stats New Zealand's suicide data comes from the the coroner's office, and the coroner, against all plausible reason, itself categorises suicide as a mental health symptom, mental health disorder symptom. And it's like, oh my God, the more you do that, the less you can focus on the real reasons and focus on how to prevent suicide. You cannot prevent suicides of despair and anguish and just escape from torture if you constantly insist on classifying it as a symptom of a mental health disorder. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, suicides and suicide attempts are genuine by definition. They are decisions that the person has made that they need to escape something that nothing else will allow them to escape. And as I've said, some of those reasons are temporary and bad, but other reasons are pretty well founded, but not that many of them. I think it's estimated in overseas data, and I don't think that'd be terribly different from what we would find here if we actually had proper, you know, data analysts and properly coded phenomena. I think we'd find that only about 30% are caused by mental health disorders, being primary mental health disorders, because the fact that someone has PTSD and tries to kill themselves does not mean that they've tried to kill themselves because of PTSD. It means that the circumstances of their life have caused both PTSD and suicidality. And that's really basic stats. That's extraordinarily basic stats. Like I would not consider anyone to be educated if they don't know the difference between causation and correlation, and that's virtually 90% of New Zealanders. So I do not regard New Zealanders as having any kind of education, really. If you don't have basic statistical education, then you cannot possibly interpret any data around you, and that's exactly why people keep coming up with fucking ridiculous ideas, such as if someone's suicidal because they're being abused and no one will intervene, to refer them to mental health services. I mean, it's just a fucking living hell. Like, it really is a living hell. Like, you just feel like you're going fucking insane. It's like, oh my God. And what's even worse is you get police to do the welfare check sometimes. Like, oh, hi, yeah, I heard you were suicidal. Are you okay? And it's like, no, I'm suicidal. what did you expect to hear? And then they go, well, do you want to speak to a mental health nurse? And I'm like, no. And they're like, why not? I'm like, because I've got a fucking certificate from a fucking psychiatric hospital psychiatrist that released me from the Mental Health Act that says I'm sane, and nothing can be done for me in the field of mental health. And it says that he knows that it says that I'm moderate to high risk for suicide. And unfortunately, he can't hold me because the Mental Health Act doesn't allow people to be held simply for being suicidal. Their suicidality must be caused by a mental health problem, and I don't have one. So, as I've said so many times, I think I've told half of New Zealand by this point. Could you stop suggesting that I talk to mental health services? Because I don't know why you think a mental health nurse, not even a psychiatric nurse, but a fucking mental health nurse on the 0800 number, I don't know what you think that she's going to do about criminal abuse that's making my life unbearable. And I don't know why you assume that I haven't had any contact with mental health services before. It's amazing how many people, even from human rightsy kind of like organisations that try to stop someone's life from being shit, their bottom line is called the Samaritans. It's like, what do you think the Samaritans are going to do? It's the police's job to do something. Why do you think we have laws against, not all of the Crimes Act is about crimes that are done to people, but there is a section of the Crimes Act called Crimes Against the Person. Like as an individual, like let that sink in. And could there be a reason for, not a lot of acts of parliament have an offences section, an offences, or at least an offences section that relates to offences that the suffering individual can take recourse through. And very few of our acts actually offer, when they do have offences sections and there is recourse, very few of them are recourses that that an individual can take themselves. It's generally through a regulator or, some other, a department that administers the act or whatever. Like you can report it to someone, some agency, and they may or may not do something. But the Crimes Act, when it comes to crimes against the person, those are the crimes that you report to the police, and the police prosecution service, will take to court. And I don't know why people these days just absolutely refuse to acknowledge crimes. It's like, I just want someone who's fake helped me over the past 18 months to look me in the eye, without their eyes wandering, look me in the eye and say, I've never heard of the Crimes Act, and I can't imagine that anyone would deliberately harm somebody else. That they're quite happy to say to me, if you're not coping from what you say is the abuse, then you need to get a psychiatric review. And these have been, members of my pseudo family, including people who have been, you know, those fucking boomer activists at university. You know, they will protest against the fucking war without knowing anything about why wars happen and why they have to play out. They'll protest and they will blow up buildings and sometimes assassinate public figures. But what they won't do is stand between their daughter or sister or cousin and her abuser. And I had one scumbag in my family and she married into it, who ranted and railed quite out of character for her mild manner about the fact that my cousin, her daughter, was not being paid enough in her entry-level job, and actually suggested that the owner of the small business my cousin worked at, if she couldn't afford to pay more, then she should hire fewer staff. So she's actually saying that this person should hire fewer people and pay the people she hires more. So she also calls herself a socialist. I'm not kidding, like those are the words. She says, I am a socialist. And she says, I become more socialist as I get older. And then proposes the exact opposite of socialism. And not even in a sensible way, you know. But when it comes to stepping between her niece and powerful predators, she suddenly doesn't want to get involved, doesn't want to take sides. And I've tried to kill myself twice. I mean, it's kind of simplistic to say I've tried to kill myself twice. I've sort of done a few things, like I've tried a few things in combination. That was the sort of the first time, which was a fairly nebulous time zone, because I was trying to die of natural causes really quickly. And you know, I had you know, I have a natural disadvantage that was suddenly a natural advantage to, you know, dying a natural death. So I did whatever I could to, you know, it was very heartbreaking at the time, but I was trying to deprive my body of what it needed to survive. And I think if you're just the slightest bit sentimental, it's just got to tug the heartstrings, right? I'm just trying to, because I'm quite healthy and I will try to make sure I get all the nutrients that I need, and, you know, and then I was just actively trying to, like, starve myself, and I was doing enough research that I could cope without breaking my own heart to use my pretty good lay knowledge, because, you know, I'm a pretty experienced patient, and as an SB, I do get very focused on sort of data collection, and it's not for this. I'm just very interested in things, and I like to understand, and I learnt quite a lot about the human body, and I mean, it's at these times when I'm like, fuck, I wish I had a medical degree so I know exactly what to do to deprive my body, because I don't want to do two opposing things. Like, I was like, well, I'm trying to die of renal failure by stopping taking my immunosuppressants to keep my graft kidney safe for my immune system. But then at the same time, I was trying to intensify my likelihood of death by starving myself. And then I was thinking, well, I'm probably working against myself there, because the kidneys work to protect you and keep you alive by processing the excess nutrients that, if not removed, people don't understand what nutrients, micronutrients do. A lot of the time they've got no fucking idea, but it's like actually quite like fucking blatant shit. Like, potassium keeps your heart going. Too much and too little, your heart stops. Goodbye. Like, we're talking about quite dramatic effects, right? So I was like, well, if I do, you can really do these self-contradictory or, opposing things, and, I could, anyway, whatever. So I didn't really know, but while I was trying to figure it out in the middle of all that, I got picked out of the fucking blue by fucking, a couple of mental health workers with a fucking court order under the Mental Health Act, and a couple of cops, and taken to Hillmorton and abused really badly at Hillmorton, like horribly abused in ways that most people just refuse. They won't even let you finish. Like, they won't let you finish. They're just like, no, that's not what happens. And it's like, oh, so that's how people, that's why we need Royal Commission and investigations into these things, because you can't fucking tell anybody. Like, you just, no one will listen. Like, they just won't. It's how evil. It's just like, society is evil. It really is. Especially a society that's just not governed by any laws. And I'm not necessarily saying 2023 is worse than 1953, but overall, but in some ways it's infinitely worse. Because these days we don't have criminals, we just have, like, no one will ever admit that someone's got a bad motive. It's just a misunderstanding. And the only person who gets punished for having a bad motive is the victim, which is incredible. So we can't say that someone who stabbed the victim had a bad motive, but we can roundly scold the victim for claiming that the assailant did it on purpose. And I think after 20 minutes, that's what I was saying. Like, we don't need more laws. We just need government officials who will take a hard line, and we definitely need more regulators, but we also need regulators who will do the job that they're tasked to do, and not let their management appointed to the task to turn discipline into encouragement, which is what happened with TCIT, MB's tenancy compliance and investigation team, which was there to deal with recalcitrant landlords by coming down on those who won't follow the rules and who will put vulnerable people at risk. And I've seen the policy documents because I got them through an OIA request, and doesn't matter. We're not about disciplining people. We're about encouraging people in the right direction, and we don't abuse people by disbelieving, their claims of sincerity, because that's really abusive, and you should just shut up and just keep getting abused by your landlord because you're really ungenerous in your spirit, and that's like harshing our vibe. And I don't want to live in this society, I really don't, and that's the only thing that I can keep behind me during my 2 attempts, and that's sort of driving my third. It's much harder than I thought. I thought I'd be ready to take the 3rd step, but I'm not. It's really strange. I really enjoy life. I don't want to live in this world of people. I really don't. I just want people to leave me alone because I can be happy by myself. And I don't want to ask anybody else for help because they just really psychologically abuse me for the reasons I've given. How dare you? How dare you complain that someone's done something to you? Have you thought about it from their perspective? And with all the research that's been done on, it's got a few different names, but one name that's been copyrighted by a very good organisation whose website is the Mend Project. It's copyrighted the term double abuse, and I'm not entirely sure what the copyright is for, but I do not think it is for any commercial purposes. I think it's just so they can keep the purity of their message, which is, very easily bastardized, as I've seen by asking so many advocacy agencies for help, and instead of receiving help, just had the whole purpose of the agency being there to protect vulnerable people from predators, just had the predator taken out of the mix. So all we have is correcting misunderstandings, which is fantastic for abusers because they don't have to make any excuses because society makes it for them. And I've been abused by lots of those agencies. So I can imagine that the Mend Project has copyrighted double abuse to make sure that no one else can co-opt it to just mean something like, oh, just a double mistake or a double misunderstanding or something. And double abuse is the same thing as secondary abuse, except secondary abuse has a couple of different definitions. And one of those definitions is the abuse that is done to people by the people they go to disclose the abuse to, and the response that they get. And I always said, and I was saying this fairly early on when I thought that I must not, I didn't know that I would still be going 18 months later. This would be like 3 months into it. I couldn't believe it. And I arrived in Christchurch and, around the start of July, and I can't believe that I've gone into another tenancy that's probably even worse. It's just absolutely fucking unbelievable. But right back at the beginning, when I'd felt I'd been in the abuse for quite a long time and I was already suffering quite bad physical stress effects, and PTSD was setting in, and I have entrenched complex PTSD now. I'm damaged for life, through and through. And that's even if the abuse had any sign of stopping. But I always said, gosh, the abuse that I'm receiving is 40% of the trauma I'm experiencing, and the other 60% is what's done to me by the people I tell. And then having done that, having had that time to research the stuff of what was happening to me, because I didn't have any time. Wellington, I just flopped an island for a month and, temporary accommodation, and I had a bit of time to do some research on what's happened to me, which is a very common question for people who've been traumatised, and it's a big part of trauma-informed therapy is to help them understand what's happened to them. And I didn't have anyone to do that for me, so I just, watched a lot of YouTube and read a lot of stuff. And everything I've been saying to my loving family, and M. Scott Peck, and we all know who he is. He's a psychiatrist who wrote The Road Less Travelled and a number of other books. He's just spot on, such a lucid intellect, and totally no bullshit. He said that laziness is love's opposite, and it is so true. And I know that no one's ever loved me. Well, that's not true. It's difficult. A relationship as I had with my dad, I know he loved me because he made an awful lot of effort for me. And as opposed he was to many of my beliefs, he would have fought really. He would not have let this. He would be in between me. He wouldn't let this happen to me. And the same as my granddad, my mum's dad. And they're from two different bloodlines, and those two men would not let this happen to me. Everybody else has either done it to me themselves or cognizantly stood by, because they don't love me, and I don't think they're loving people, because I don't understand how you can stand by and watch someone be taken to pieces for months on end. I don't think they would let this happen to their own children. But if they let it happen to somebody else, I think they can't love their children. They just must have some sort of, selfish emotional attachment to their children. Because you can't have love for one person without having love for another, because love is not about your relationship with somebody or something, an animal or whatever. It's impossible to love your dog and not love all dogs. If you love your dog and you don't love dogs in a fucking meat farm and the conditions that they, I can't even think of, I can barely even cope thinking about those conditions, and that's hardly the worst conditions that an animal or even a human exists in. There's no way you can love your dog and not love another dog. If you act to remove the suffering that your own child is going through, and then you turn your back to the suffering that your niece is going through, you have no love in you. And there's no way. That's not how love works. Love isn't something that occurs at the interface of your relationship with somebody. Love is something that's in you. to know that nobody loves me, that I am unloved, is hard, and it's harder than knowing that there are people who are hating me, which is the exact opposite of love, and that's making a huge effort to harm me. The damage by the lack of love, I think, is worse. And through this process, I have reluctantly become pro-choice. And that's saying it lightly. I think that I think I would fully back any practicable research into making sure that all children who are gonna live without love won't be born. I think about my little child self and and as a teenager, things will get better, and things did get better, and then they just got worse and worse and worse. And I think about the Caitlin who moved to Christchurch in a very severe breakdown that most people do not have it in them, do not have the strength in them to do. But who have the gall to fucking advise me about how to manage my mental health, and how desperate that Caitlin was to find trauma-informed therapy instead of just abuse and abuse and abuse, and just some way to make sense of what had happened to her, because she couldn't do it herself. I couldn't open that box. I started to open that box, and God, hell just started falling out of it. I had to close it. I couldn't cope with what was coming out myself. And I didn't want to move. I had to move. Because I couldn't afford to pay rent and have my stuff still in storage in Wellington. So I had to move before I felt ready, and I moved here. And then the hell started, and 9 or 10 months later, it's only just getting going. And what I'm faced with now is a very It involves making a very difficult decision based on a predictive model that I don't have enough data to run. I was very clear from the beginning of when this torture began that if I'm evicted, then I won't be here for that. My body will be, but I will be gone. And I have the most solid reasons you could ever wish for to make that decision. Like, you'd really have to be pretty fucking stupid to not see that that's the only practicable solution. We're not talking in emotions. We're not taking emotions out of it either. Humans are emotional creatures, and suffering is almost entirely emotional. We're factoring in emotions, but we're not deciding with emotions. And I've crunched the data every which way, and since I decided that was the only thing to do if I were evicted, all I've done is gather more data to make me more certain that the only way to avoid intolerable suffering is to die, rather than leave my home. But it's so close now, and it's the same thing that I was doing when I was talking in October in my videos. Those first videos, and I was only making those videos because I couldn't write anymore, and then I discovered actually this is quite a therapeutic way of putting my thoughts down, and all the time. It's been a little bit over an hour now, and I've just been looking at a face that implicitly understands me, and the only face that wants the best for me. Including if that is the best, to help me know how to die. I'm the only person who cares. My GP does care a lot, but for reasons that there's just no point or need to go into, she can't be by my side in this. She's probably younger than me, and she's got kids and a lot of patience, and she doesn't have any knowledge or connections or I do have her, I have to say. I think her name is Elodie. I have to say, I think that probably in the sense that M. Scott Peck meant, I think that she does love me. And that sounds very sort of strange if you sort of mean it in the kind of day-to-day sense, and I don't mean that. So she really cares, and she's making a real effort.
I try to think of alternatives to dying. It's just nothing realistic. Because it's not just that I have to get through another really, really big hurdle to come through the other side. It's that, and it's not even that on the other side of the hurdle there's a drastically reduced quality of life, and I've already feel that I've cut loose as much as I can really tolerate to have a quality of life. It's that I'm probably, and the best data that I have in this predictive model tells me that I'm gonna lead a life of victimization until I die. There's nothing to suggest that that's going to change. And nothing at all. All the evidence says that that's very likely.